doomsx-men are finally here. They're big, they're bad, they're powerful. So powerful that in their first encounter with the X-Men, they recreate a Chappelle Show skit. What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we're going to be talking about X-Men number 29, written by Gerry Duggan with art by Joshua Cassara and color by Marte Garcia. So this issue is the one where, if you've been keeping up with any of my previous videos, actually one right up here if you haven't checked out the last one, we talked about Doom's X-Men squad, and while at the time we didn't really have a lot of information on them, so I kind of speculated a little bit just based on some of the solicits, things that I have seen shared by a combination of Marvel just putting out normal solicits, as well as following Gerry Duggan and Joshua Cassara on social media and them sharing some little tidbits here and there, but nothing that really told us anything about any of the characters as individuals. This issue basically does that. For those of you who are familiar with Giant Size X-Men number 1, I mean, at this point, who isn't? But the landmark Giant Size X-Men that came out in 1975 was really unique in that it showed how Charles Xavier brought together this new squad of X-Men ranging from radically different backgrounds. And in that, we saw Charles Xavier reaching out to Storm, reaching out to Thunderbird, reaching out to Nightcrawler and Sunfire and so on and so forth. We get Dr. Doom's version of the very same thing. Albeit before getting into that, we see how Dr. Doom interacted with Charles Xavier during the House of X story arc when Charles was getting ready to address all of humanity and basically let them know that mutants aren't going to be, anyone's doormat anymore, that they've created their own sovereign nation and all this other crazy stuff, got their own gateways and Krakoan drugs and all this other stuff. It was at this moment where we get a little bit of an interesting jump in. This is something that I never thought about when I went back and read House of X number 6, but Gerry Duggan took a moment that I feel like, I don't know if Jonathan Hickman had set this up back then or if this was even in Jonathan Hickman's mind at the time of creating this, but if you go back and read House of X number 6, there's a moment where Charles is getting ready to address the entire world, and what happens is Charles takes a pause. Well, it doesn't seem like that long of a pause because honestly, in the span that this all happens, it's at this moment where he is conferring with Magneto and Moira about what he's about to do. They say, yes, go ahead and drop that ether on humanity. And Charles is like, okay, cool. But then Charles doesn't say anything, but it seems natural because the very next panel is not Charles just sitting there saying nothing. It's Magneto just looking at him and saying, Charles? Almost kind of making it sound as though Charles maybe took a moment to do what he's about to do, or maybe Magneto wasn't sure if Charles was ready to say what he was going to have to say. Literally, the very first panel of the very next page following, Magneto just kind of giving, a nod to Charles saying, hey, you good? And then suddenly Charles kind of leans into everything he's about to say. Well, apparently, Gerry Duggan has inserted a little something into that moment to kind of give that a little bit more life. It's the fact that the reason why Charles has paused is because he is communicating with Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom has created his own version of Cerebro, complete with not only blackjack and hookers, but also with real mutants. He has created his own version of Charles Xavier's X-Men, as well as one of their most iconic accessories. And what is going on here is Doom is basically letting Charles know off rip, I'm not down with what it is you're doing. You are stepping out into the world. You are putting yourself on the world stage. You are declaring your sovereignty and making waves in ways mutants never have before, at least not in the Earth 616 timeline. While he respects it, he ain't down with it. And we knew this going back to House of X because Latveria was one of the key countries other than Wakanda who openly and outright rejected Krakoa's offers. So yeah, none of this was really a surprise, but Dr. Doom explains a little bit more of why he believes that Charles Xavier is not going to be able to cut the mustard when it comes to doing what needs done. Kind of like how Namor had called out Charles Xavier during House of X and Powers of 10, basically citing that you're not ready to do what you're about to do. You just recognized your greatness. I have known my greatness my entire life. and you just aren't ready to pull the trigger on this. And Doom is basically telling Charles the same thing here, and he's right. He's ultimately right in all this, because this is something that came up in other issues of X-Men Red, where Magneto had basically warned Storm that you need to watch out for Charles, because with me gone, there's no checks and balances there to keep him in place. He is not going to listen to anyone else, and he's going to think that what he's doing is right, even when what he's doing is potentially wrong. And it's not so much that Charles is a bad person and just immediately wants to do the worst thing humanly possible. No, it's because he's always going to think that because he has the best intentions, the thing he's doing is ultimately right, even when it is in fact ultimately wrong. Doom was able to suss out that bit of information for himself even before Magneto had warned anybody else of it. And I feel like, us as readers, we have been following Charles Xavier's journey long enough that we know Charles ain't about that life. All that said, yes, Doom has his own X-Men squad, and while I jokingly refer to them as the D-Men, because I'm a child, no, they're actually referred to in this issue as the 7 daggers of Latveria, each a mutant with power that is pretty damn potent. The reason why the 7 daggers of Doom are in lockstep with Dr. Doom, it's not even just because they're Latverian, but because he has offered them something that they've never had in their entire life, and that's protection. Speaking of protection, shout out to this video sponsor's capsule.com. I know a lot of you, some of Earth's mightiest subscribers, are collectors, and you, like myself, have probably got some really awesome comics out there that you want to just make sure don't get messed up. The pride and joy of my personal collection is this right here, this New Mutants #1, signed by both Chris Claremont and Bob McLeod, as well as the first appearance of Gambit in X-Men Annual #14, also signed by Chris Claremont. So yeah, I get it, and honestly, there's no better way to protect things of that magnitude than with comic capsules. These are built for nerds by nerds who wanted to protect their comics and decided to pass on their methods to you. Comic capsules can fit both Silver Age and modern comics, so even if you have a copy of Amazing Fantasy #15 or Giant Size X-Men #1, both of those will fit nicely inside a comic capsule. These things are sturdy, they're durable, they're stackable, they're easy to use. They also have reinforced corners and anti-UV resins, so that way your comics are perfectly safe, sound, and snug, as well as protected. One other awesome thing about these things is that they also have a very easy way to display them. You can mount them on your wall, and they already have a built-in hole on the back where you can literally just hang them straight up on the wall. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Not only are these things amazing and protective as all get out, but they're also quite affordable. You can pick up one of these for $9.99 or 10 for $94.90. Now, those prices are USD and limited time introductory. Now, for those of you interested in picking up a 10-pack of these, the board boys over at comiccapsule.com have set up a promo code, Blerd Without Fear. Use that promo code to pick up a 10-pack of these, and you will get free standard shipping. Trust me, they're worth it. Don't walk, run to comiccapsule.com and pick up your comic capsules today, and make sure you check them out on social media and you peruse the website, because they have more amazing products coming up that I can't wait to try out. But with that said, let's get back to the video. Now, I've talked a good deal about some of the mutants that we see depicted in this issue. I'll start off with the first one, Dreamer. In the previous video, I basically said this is what Dreamer's power was, that he was able to enter the minds of people through their dreams, very similar to the X-Men character Somnus, so I was pretty much right in that regard. Now, the character Iron Cloak was a little bit different. In the previous video, I said that Iron Cloak was a mutant who very likely either had the ability to make themselves invulnerable or had the ability to create barriers of some sort. I was close, but not quite on the money with that. Her power does center around invulnerability. However, it's not about making barriers. It's that she is able to grant another person invulnerability simply by touching them. And while we don't know exactly how long this invulnerability is able to persist, it is implied that it lapses after a certain period of time, but that time has been redacted, so I'm sure we'll likely figure this out later. I'm also willing to gamble that sustained touch might actually make that invulnerability last for as long as that person is being touched. But the implication here is that she simply touches you, you become invulnerable for a certain and, as of present time, redacted amount of time. We also know about the character Slag. Slag is somebody who I pretty much guessed him right. He's, for all intents and purposes, Latverian John Ironfire, whereas we saw in the Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants series, as well as recent issues of X-Men Red, the difference between Slag and John Ironfire is that while John Ironfire's blood is literally made of molten metal, Slag's is more just straight up magma, but also his skin is apparently made of solid rock. Now, Doom points out that the hardest part of his body is in fact his brain, which is interesting considering that the brain is quite literally probably the softest part of your body. But he brings up the notion that it could potentially affect how he thinks and processes information, though it remains to be seen, though we do get some instances where it seems as though Slag, while he may not be the most verbose person or well-spoken person, it does, however, seem like he's a very contemplative character. In a later scene, we do recognize that Slag is quite personable when he wants to be, but for the most part, he's kind of a quiet, gentle giant. I can't really speak for the characters Dreamer and Ironcloak in this issue because we don't really get any backstory on them, but when we are formally introduced to Slag, it's heavily implied that he imposed exile upon himself in the form of a prison sentence, one that clearly, because of his powers, Doom was unable to actually keep him there if he didn't want to be there. When Doom approaches him about joining his House of Doom, it's heavily implied he didn't agree with what Dr. Doom was offering at the time, though it seems when Doom offers him an opportunity to rejoin the House of Doom as depicted in this issue, he joins, and once again, he literally breaks his own chains. No one had to let him free. He could have left anytime he wanted to, so apparently he is incredibly powerful. I would even dare say that one could probably match him up quite well with other strongman characters in the X-Men mythos, characters like Rogue or Colossus, Gentle or Strong Guy. I would be willing to gamble Slag is right up there with each and every one of them, and who knows, he might even be stronger. One of the other characters we're introduced to is the character of Nerium. Nerium is the one who is the wild card of the group, at least by Dr. Doom's estimation, because, well, for one, Doom is of the belief that Nerium is not 100% bought in to Latveria. Nerium does exactly what I said on the tin. She can control and communicate with plants, plant life, so on and so forth. Her mutant power makes her one with nature, and as a matter of fact, she even is referred to by both herself and other characters in this issue as being the land. Her floral kinesis powers pretty much let you know not only is she able to command plants and commune with them, but she very likely shares some level of connection with them that is deeper than just being able to communicate and control. Of the characters we meet in this issue, she is the one that is most likely to, if things don't go the way she wants, to just dip on the House of Doom and maybe even potentially join the X-Men, while she does fight in favor of Doom because he did free her from being treated as a carny attraction. There is some level of allegiance there, but at the same time, she probably reads the writing on the wall. Matter of fact, by the time we get to the later portions of this issue, she even admits as much, that she will throw her allegiance to the X-Men should they need her help in stopping Orchis, because she recognizes that, well, yes, Orchis does not want to pull up on Latveria now, but once they're done dealing with mutants as a whole, they're gonna eventually come after Dr. Doom, and by proxy, come after those mutants. So she is probably the most forward-thinking of any of the group. Last and most certainly not least is Volta Doom. Now, you would imagine a character who takes the last name Doom. You'd imagine that she probably is drinking the Kool-Aid. And she is. Volta Doom is pretty much what I said she was as well. Volta Doom has the ability to channel electricity. Now, the trick with her power is that while I do say she can channel it, she doesn't have any actual control of her abilities, hence why she has the vibranium spear in her possession throughout this issue and the other depictions of her that we have seen, because this is what helps her channel her power and keep it from just flying out and arcing all over the place. She is the character we are first really shown any backstory on of the 7 daggers, and with her we discover that, yeah, when she first got her powers, she didn't want to hurt anybody. She wasn't trying to be a bad person. She ultimately had no clue what she was doing and was trying to get people away from her so she didn't kill anybody. But because Doom showed her such kindness and gave her the gift of being able to better control her abilities, she is more bought in than probably any other character, and I would dare say maybe with the exception of Dreamer and Ironcloak, who once again we really haven't heard them say very much, and we really haven't seen any real backstory on them. Honestly, I feel like we don't even need backstory on them just because we've already been introduced to them during Chip Zdarsky's X-Men Fantastic Four crossover from 2020. However, a lot has changed since then, so I imagine the next issue we'll learn more about them, but just as of present time, Volta Doom seems to be the most bought in of any of the 7 daggers, and Doom even says as much, even stating that she could potentially be an heir to the throne of Doom. That's interesting because I wonder what Valeria Richards would have to say about that. Considering that Dr. Doom has very few favorites in life, I wonder what would happen if you got Volta Doom and Valeria Richards in the same room. I'd love to see that conversation. Now, I said 7 daggers of Latveria, but I have only mentioned 5 characters. That is because we don't see the other 2. The other 2 are mentioned, but their names are redacted. One of them is stated as a woman who is not ready to serve and may never be. She will stay where she is until she changes her mind. Now, I'm gonna go on a limb and say that of the characters that are listed here in the 7 daggers of Latveria, all of them are brand spanking new characters, and technically you could make a case for Dreamer and Ironcloak not being new characters, mostly because they were introduced like 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago almost. So yeah, I can make a case that they're not new. They're relatively new. But as far as like, knowing anything about them, they may as well be brand spanking new. But these characters, because their names are redacted, it makes me wonder if these particular characters are people we have actually seen before. Characters that it would be an ultimate surprise. Otherwise, why redact their name? As well as speaking about them in vagaries. Once again, the female character who is mentioned, her power is not even mentioned, which that makes me wonder more than anything if she is a character we have seen before, because otherwise he would say what her power was. And I feel like the power would probably be something. It would just be a dead giveaway as to who it was, but who knows? It could just the same be a brand new character, and Jerry Duggan's just being extra protective about who that character is and maybe just wanting us to focus more on the 5 characters we're introduced to here. That could very well be a reason. I would not be against that. But I feel like nothing is done unintentionally. So if that name has been redacted, it's very likely because it's somebody we would know who it was. And the same goes for the male character who is referred to in this, saying that his powers are too volatile to control at the moment, and so he shall remain enthralled until desperate measures are called for. So that once again lends more credence to the fact that these characters, especially the male in question, will very likely all come into play when we get to the Fall of the House of X, Rise of the Powers of 10. So just that is something that is being set up. This is all set up for something major that's going to happen, in and around that time. Whenever Orchis is ultimately about to take that L, that is when it's going to come up. What I do love about this issue is that while yes, the 7 daggers of Latveria are fighting against Wolverine and Shadowcat and Ms. Marvel, it's really awesome because the fight doesn't go exactly the way you're going to think it's going to go. Like, yeah, the daggers, they shit on Wolverine, Ms. Marvel, and Shadowcat. Really more Wolverine than anybody else, and really more specifically the character Slag and Volta Doom. However, it does create this interesting dynamic between them, because while Doom has definitely churched up the idea that the X-Men are the bad guys and are going to come after them and try and force them to leave Latveria, a place that they see as their home, regardless of the fact that Doom has used them in a lot of ways, we can't forget about, and this is actually something that's mentioned by Wolverine, because Doom tries to point out that the last time Wolverine was on Latverian soil, which once again was that Chip Zdarsky X-Men Fantastic Four crossover, Wolverine killed a Latverian mutant. But once again, just as your Wolverine saying here, he did not kill that mutant on purpose. He thought that that was Dr. Doom, and it was a Doom bot that had a Latverian mutant like literally shoved inside of it. So there was no way for Wolverine to know. Even with his superhuman sense of smell, he was unable to recognize that that was not Dr. Doom, because otherwise he would not have done it. He even points out the fact that Doom somehow masked that person's scent, so that way he would not act the way he normally would had he just walked up and been like, oh, there's a person in there. I can smell the person inside. Like, he wouldn't have done it. He just wouldn't have done it. But I do appreciate the fact that even after all this is done, Dr. Doom, because once again, Dr. Doom is one of those guys, he's very self-interested. While he is a villain, he is not going to just do things irrationally. And while he didn't necessarily want the fight with the mutants, he had to do it because of his 7 daggers, because they needed it. The House of Doom needed this fight because Dr. Doom has just put it out there that the X-Men are bad people and that they want to take them away. If he didn't let them cut loose, then it maybe would have hurt his propaganda that he's been pushing to them. But at the same time, he also knows Orchis is coming for that ass eventually. So he wants the X-Men as allies, but because he's Dr. Doom, he's not going to ask the mutants for help. And when the mutants ask him for help, he is not going to give it in turn, no matter how much he knows he needs their help, because he is Dr. Doom. He's not going to just go with the flow of this and, show any sign of weakness. No, he wants the X-Men to feel like they need him more than he needs them. And in fact, one can make the argument they need each other equally, but Doom will never, ever let that be a thing. Look back no further than Judgment Day itself, when the progenitor told Dr. Doom, I will give you a favorable judgment if you admit Reed Richards is smarter than you. And Dr. Doom didn't even answer. He just laughed in the progenitor's face, because that's just how Dr. Doom is. So yeah, Dr. Doom has basically let it be known he is going to be there for the X-Men in the final battle with Orchis, but ultimately he's just trying to pretend that he's not interested. I mean, look no further than how he treats the X-Men here in this. The fact that while he just fought them, and then he literally turns around and hands out a Beware All Colonizers Day spread. This is basically Thanksgiving right here. He even went as far as to make sure that the dishes were culturally appropriate for Ms. Marvel, knowing that she's Muslim. That is not an enemy. That is a guy who definitely wants to make sure he stays on your right side, no matter how much he might pretend that he's Big Billy Badass. I just love the energy, because it literally reminds me of the Chappelle Show skit with Prince, where he's playing basketball against Charlie Murphy, and Prince and the Blouses, they basically beat the brakes off of Charlie Murphy and his squad, and then it's like, hey, you losers, come back with me, get some pancakes. That's basically what Dr. Doom did here, and I love it. As for what comes next with the X-Men, we know that the next issue is very likely going to focus a bit more on what's going on with Synch and Talon, because when Wolverine, Ms. Marvel, and Shadowcat return to the lair in the Morlock tunnels, they are missing. There is blood everywhere. It seems like Jerry Duggan is finally going to pay off the story arc from one of his earliest issues of X-Men with X-Men #3, where we saw that the High Evolutionary had his eye on Synch and wanted his blood, which Synch weirdly gave to him because it would stop the conflict that was going on, and the High Evolutionary just dipped. That's going to be interesting. I can't wait to see what's going on there, but I don't really have any thoughts on what could potentially come of it, because, once again, covers lie. I feel like what's going on here, there definitely was a fight, but I wonder if the High Evolutionary is not the reason that fight actually happens. Like, I wonder if Orchis is more involved, and maybe the High Evolutionary just kind of happens to factor in to where Synch and Talon are now, and less why they're no longer there in the first place. That's what I'm wondering. And yeah, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I loved it. I thought this issue was fantastic. It did everything I was hoping it would do. It gave us information on the 7 daggers of Latveria, and to be fair, actually introduced new elements to that I wasn't even expecting there to be. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, you want to see all my coverage breaking down X-Men and all other comics from Marvel and DC, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap that notification bell, so that way you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for taking the time to pick this video out of a litany of other things you could have been watching on this platform. And also, don't forget to visit comiccapsule.com so you can pick up your comic capsules and protect your comics. And also remember that you can use the promo code Blerd without fear to get free shipping for your purchase. Until next time, let me know what you thought about X-Men number 29. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.